It takes less than a minute for an ordinary afternoon to become unforgettable. One moment, 5-year-old Sophia was spinning in her Nashville backyard, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny. The next, she was gone. No scream, no creak of a gate. Just silence, the kind that drops like a stone into the pit of a parent's stomach. Her mother, Laura, thought it was a prank at first, the kind of hide-and-seek game kids love to play. But as the seconds turned into minutes, and the swing in the yard rocked with no one on it, panic replaced reason. By the time Laura dialed 911, her hands shaking, the only thing louder than her voice was the sound of her own heart breaking. What happened to Sophia? And how could a child disappear so quickly, without a trace? The answer would come from an unlikely hero, a German shepherd named Kyle, whose instincts cut through the chaos. This is not just a story about rescue. It's a story about second chances, about grief that refuses to fade, and about the loyalty of a dog who could see what no one else could. The late afternoon sun in Nashville had a way of softening everything it touched. Houses glowed gold, their porches draped in shadow, and lawns shimmered in the slow drift of heat. In the Miller backyard, the air smelled faintly of cut grass and honeysuckle, the kind of suburban evening that promised nothing but peace. Sophia Miller twirled barefoot in the yard, her bunny pressed tight in her hands. At 5 years old, she carried the boundless energy of a child untouched by worry, her laughter a thin silver thread weaving through the hum of cicadas. The swing beside the oak tree creaked in the breeze, rocking slightly, as if waiting for her to return to it. From the kitchen window, Laura Miller wiped her hands on a dish towel and shook her head. "Sophia," she called, voice half stern, half indulgent. "Dinner in 10 minutes." She expected no reply. At that age, Sophia's attention belonged to whatever game her imagination invented. Laura felt a small flicker of annoyance. It was always a struggle to coax her daughter inside, but beneath it, nothing unusual, just the tug-of-war every parent knew. Order pulling against play. Sophia spun one last time, her blonde hair catching the light, and then she wasn't there. It was that simple. That's quiet. Laura blinked, still facing the window, convinced her eyes had slipped. She scanned left, then right. The swing swayed lazily, as if a ghost had brushed past it. The bunny lay on its side in the grass, ears crumpled, its stitched smile staring upward. No Sophia, no giggle, no footsteps pattering across the yard. Her first instinct was practical. "She's hiding," Laura muttered. A sigh, heavier than it should have been, escaped her lips. She set the towel down, brushed her palms against her jeans, and walked toward the back door. The clock on the microwave read 5:31 p.m. The air outside pressed close, sticky against her arms. She circled the yard, calling her daughter's name. "Sophia? Where are you hiding, sweetheart?" A mother's sing-song tone, exaggerated cheer, masking the little prickle beginning to stir in her chest. She checked behind the tree, under the plastic slide, even bent low to peek beneath the deck steps. Nothing. Her voice sharpened. "Sophia, don't play games. It's time to come in." Still nothing. The prickle became a knot. Logic whispered its excuses. Maybe she slipped inside without notice. Maybe she followed the neighbor's cat toward the fence. Laura clung to those explanations like lifelines, even as something older, deeper, rose inside her, the instinct every parent dreads, the whisper that doesn't go away. She went back inside, her footsteps fast now. "Sophia," she called down the hallway. Her voice echoed against the walls. She threw open the bathroom door, peered behind the shower curtain. No one. She opened the closet in the hall, clothes brushing against her arms as she pushed them aside. Empty. Her annoyance was gone, replaced by a tremor she couldn't quiet. The house felt too still, as if it too was waiting. She dashed to the living room. No Sophia beneath the couch. No small figure curled up with her books. She jogged to the laundry room, checked behind the baskets. Nothing. Her breathing hitched. The whisper inside her had turned into a shout. Back outside, the yard mocked her with its ordinariness. The swing still moved gently, rocking in rhythm with a wind that offered no answers. The bunny remained sprawled in the grass, alone. Laura's knees nearly buckled at the sight. It wasn't just a toy. It was Sophia's anchor, never abandoned. Not willingly. The bottom dropped out of her stomach. She began to shout now, no trace of playful tone, her voice cracking against the still air. "Sophia! Sophia!" Each call ricocheted through the cul-de-sac, scattering birds from the rooftops. Curtains shifted in nearby houses. Neighbors looked out, sensing something was wrong. Laura's hands trembled as she pulled her phone from her pocket. She dialed 3 numbers, her thumb slick with sweat. The ring barely lasted a second before the operator answered. "My daughter's gone," Laura gasped. "She was in the backyard. She's gone. She's just gone." The words broke apart in her throat. The calm voice on the other end asked questions. When? Where? How long? But all Laura could see was the empty swing, the abandoned bunny, the suffocating silence. Somewhere inside her, denial still fought to breathe. Maybe she had wandered next door. Maybe she was crouched behind the shed, giggling. But the louder truth drowned it. Children do not vanish in less than a minute, unless something terrible has happened. Neighbors began to spill from their homes, faces drawn tight with alarm. A man grabbed a flashlight, though the sun had not yet set. A woman pulled her dog toward the street, scanning beneath parked cars. Voices overlapped, calling Sophia's name. A search was forming, but it felt chaotic, directionless. Laura stood at the edge of her yard, fists clenched, eyes wide. The world she knew, the safe suburban world of quiet streets and friendly neighbors, had cracked in two. The ordinary had become sinister in the span of a breath. And through it all, the bunny lay in the grass, ears drooping, silent witness to the moment innocence slipped away. The phone slipped once in Laura's hand before she caught it again, her fingers clumsy with panic. Her breath came in broken gasps as she pressed 911, the digits blurring through a veil of tears. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was calm, professional, too calm. Laura's words tumbled out in pieces. My daughter, she's gone. She was just outside, in the backyard, less than a minute ago. She's gone. She's gone. Her voice cracked, climbing to a pitch that startled even herself. The dispatcher began asking questions, measured, deliberate, grounding her in the storm. What's your daughter's name? Age? What time did you last see her? Laura tried to answer, but her throat closed. She clutched the edge of the counter with her free hand, nails scraping against wood. Sophia, 5 years old. She had her bunny. Her voice faltered again, her knees threatening to fold beneath her. It was 5:30, just after. Please, you have to hurry. We've dispatched officers to your location, the dispatcher assured. Stay on the line. Stay calm. Can you describe what she was wearing? Yellow dress. White flowers. Bare feet. Laura forced the words past trembling lips. Then silence. Her ears rang as if the world itself had stopped breathing. Somewhere far away, she heard the dispatcher repeat, "Help is on the way." At the precinct across town, The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. It was a quiet evening. Paperwork stacked high, the kind of shift that numbed more than challenged. Sergeant Ethan Ward sat at his desk, his eyes dull from hours of forms and signatures. Beside him, stretched out under the desk like a shadow, lay Cale. The 4-year-old German shepherd's chest rose and fell with steady rhythm, his ears twitching at every sound, the scrape of a chair, the shuffle of boots in the hallway, the clack of typewriter keys from the older officer down the row. Cale's tail flicked once, when Ethan dropped a hand absent-mindedly to scratch behind his ears. For Ethan, the presence of the dog was more than partnership. It was survival. The radio crackled suddenly, shattering the monotony. Dispatch's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. Missing child. Last seen at 17:32 hours. Female, age 5. Sophia Miller. Location? Suburban cul-de-sac, East Nashville. Caller? Mother, Laura Miller. Time elapsed. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Ethan froze mid-scribble, his pen dropping onto the report. His chest tightened with the weight of those 2 words. Every second counted, but the first hour, the golden hour, was everything. Beyond it, the odds plummeted. He looked down. Kyle was already up, ears forward, eyes burning with alertness, as if he too had absorbed the urgency through the airwaves. Ethan pushed his chair back, grabbed his vest from the hook, and rose in one fluid motion. "Ward, are you taking it?" a fellow officer called across the room. "Yeah," Ethan answered, already striding toward the door. His voice was low, steady, but inside, something darker stirred. The familiar knot of dread he'd carried for years. He whistled once, short and sharp. Cale sprang to his side, nails clicking on the tile. The dog moved like a soldier, muscles coiled, waiting. Ethan swung the cruiser's door open, Cale leaping inside with practiced ease. The dispatch repeated details over the radio as Ethan slid behind the wheel. Last seen in the backyard, no signs of struggle. Child missing approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes. That phrase carved itself into his thoughts. He'd seen what could happen in less time than that. He turned the key, engine roaring to life. Red and blue lights lit the quiet evening, scattering shadows across the station's walls. The air in the car seemed to thicken, heavy with unspoken stakes. Beside him, Cale shifted forward, pressing his nose to the crack in the window, nostrils twitching, already searching for what lay ahead. Ethan glanced at him, and for a moment, the silence between man and dog was louder than the sirens. "Let's go find her," Ethan murmured, words not just an order but a vow. Cale's ears flicked. He understood. Back in the Miller home, Laura stood on the lawn, clutching her phone to her chest. Neighbors gathered in clusters, flashlights blinking to life, though the sun had not yet set. Someone's voice called Sophia's name down the street. Another shouted toward the woods behind the cul-de-sac. Laura felt untethered, her legs numb, her mind spiraling. She kept staring at the bunny in the grass, unable to move it, as though touching it would seal the nightmare into permanence. Her lips whispered the same word over and over. "Please, please, please." The wail of sirens broke through, slicing the suburban air. Red and blue lights bounced off the windows of quiet houses, painting them in hues of alarm. A police cruiser skidded to a halt in front of the Miller home. The door opened. Ethan Ward stepped out, his vest strapped, his face set in grim determination. Cale jumped down from the back, paws hitting the ground with a thud, his body already taut with purpose. Laura stumbled forward, words tumbling. She was just here. I turned away for a second. Please, you have to find her. Ethan nodded once, firmly, without promise, but with certainty. He crouched to Kale's level, unclipping the leash, showing him the photo of Sophia the dispatcher had sent through the system. Then he picked up the bunny from the grass, holding it beneath the dog's nose. Kale sniffed, whined once, then lowered his head, nostrils sweeping across the air. His muscles stiffened, eyes sharp. Ethan rose, looked at Laura. We'll find her, but every minute counts. The clock was already ticking. The cul-de-sac was no longer quiet. The air pulsed with voices, neighbors calling Sophia's name, flashlights sweeping across yards and hedges. Teenagers on bicycles darted between porches. Retirees shuffled with worried faces. Parents clutched their children closer. A prayer circle had even begun forming on the curb, voices low, hands linked. All of them were searching outward, toward the street, the woods, the horizon, believing danger always came from beyond the fence line. But Kyle knew better. The German shepherd sniffed the air once more, ears slicing forward. He gave a low whine, and without waiting for command, turned from the yard. His nails clicked sharp against the porch steps as he darted through the open back door. "Kyle!" Ethan called, but his voice was steadier than most would expect. He trusted the dog. He followed at once, hand brushing the grip of his sidearm, eyes scanning the familiar hallways that already felt charged with menace. Laura, pale and trembling, trailed behind. "We searched the whole house," she stammered, words catching in her throat. "Every room, closets, under the beds. She's not here." Kale didn't care. His nose brushed low to the hardwood, zigzagging with purpose, tail stiff as a metronome of urgency. He moved past the living room, past the kitchen, ignoring the clusters of neighbors shouting from the lawn. The house was still, but the kind of stillness that seemed to hold its breath. Kyle's body tensed as he reached the narrow hallway. His head snapped toward the laundry room. A guttural growl rolled from his chest, deep, primal, vibrating against the walls. Ethan's pulse surged. He unclipped the radio from his vest. "Ward, inside residence, K9 alert." He barked into it, his voice clipped. Kyle lunged forward, pawing at the closed washer door with sharp metallic bangs. His barks came fast, furious, echoing in the tight space, until Laura gasped, clutching the doorframe for support. "The washer?" she whispered, disbelief in her tone. Her voice cracked. No, she couldn't." Ethan's gaze locked on the machine. A front loader, newer model. His stomach twisted. "Has anyone opened it?" he asked sharply. Laura shook her head wildly. "No, I put in towels earlier, but I never—" Her words fractured into sobs. Ethan crouched low, yanking at the handle. It didn't budge. Auto-lock. His chest clenched. He pressed his face close to the glass. The drum had turned away, shadows masking the inside. He could see only a sliver of damp cloth, indistinct. Behind him, Laura's knees buckled. "Oh God, please no," she whispered, over and over. "Tools!" Ethan shouted. "Now!" An officer rushed in from the yard, pry bar in hand. Another followed with bolt cutters. They dropped to their knees beside the machine. Every second seemed to swell into an hour. Kyle had gone silent now. He sat rigid, ears pricked, eyes locked on the washer, as though holding vigil. His stillness was worse than his barking. He knew. The first officer jammed the pry bar into the seam. Metal groaned. Sparks of paint flaked to the floor. The latch resisted, stubborn against desperate hands. Sweat dripped down Ethan's temple, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "Come on," he muttered, bracing his shoulder against the frame, adding his strength. The officer strained beside him, both men grunting with effort. Then, a crack, a pop. The door swung open. Time stopped. There, curled small within the drum, was Sophia. Her yellow dress clung damp to her skin, her lips cracked, her cheeks crimson from trapped heat. Her little arms clutched the bunny so tightly it seemed part of her. Laura screamed her name, collapsing against the doorway. Ethan reached in, arms steady, though his breath shuddered. He lifted the child carefully, cradling her head against his chest. She was limp, frighteningly so, but a faint rise and fall. "She's breathing," Ethan shouted, voice ragged. "Get medics now!" The house exploded into movement. Paramedics, already stationed outside, charged in with oxygen and a stretcher. The laundry room became a blur of efficient hands, straps, masks, murmured orders. Laura dropped to her knees beside her daughter, stroking damp hair, whispering broken words. "I'm here, baby. Mommy's here. Hold on. Hold on." Kyle remained in the corner, silent sentinel. His chest rose and fell, nostrils twitching, but he didn't move. His eyes followed Sophia, as though he'd already marked her as his to protect. Minutes blurred. Then the paramedics lifted Sophia, oxygen mask secured, onto the stretcher. Laura clung to her hand, refusing to let go as they wheeled her toward the waiting ambulance. Only when the door slammed shut behind them did Ethan exhale, his body sagging against the wall. His hands trembled as he pressed them to his knees, sweat dripping onto the hardwood. He closed his eyes for a brief second. He had seen too many of these moments end differently. Beside him, Kyle sighed, lowering himself to the floor with the weight of something ancient. Ethan reached down, running his fingers through the thick fur at the dog's neck. "You did it," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way no one else could hear. "You found her." From outside came the rising wail of the ambulance siren, carrying Sophia away into the night. But inside, in that narrow laundry room, the echoes lingered. The bang of Cale's paws against metal, the desperate crack of the latch, the sight of a child pulled from steel and silence back into breath. For Ethan, it was more than a rescue. It was a memory, clawing its way out of the past, raw and relentless. The ghost of another child, another machine, another night he hadn't made it in time. But tonight was different, because Kyle had barked when no one else knew where to look. The house was quiet when Ethan returned, too quiet for a man whose veins still carried the weight of sirens and screams. He set his keys down on the counter and stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing. Outside, the neighborhood slept under the hum of crickets, street lamps throwing weak halos on the pavement. Inside, silence pressed against him like a living thing. Kyle padded in behind him, nails ticking softly against the tile. The shepherd's movements were slower now, no longer electric with urgency. He circled once, twice, then lowered himself beside the couch with a heavy sigh. His body curled tight, chest rising steady, eyelids drooping, but never fully closing. Ethan dropped onto the armchair across from him. He watched the dog breathe, watched the chest rise, fall, rise again. There was comfort in that rhythm, a steadiness he wished his own heart could mimic. He rubbed at the back of his neck, muscles knotted from hours of tension. But the knot inside his chest, that one had no release. On the floor beside the couch, Cale stirred, ears twitching in his sleep. Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The sight of the dog in repose, the very animal who had dragged life back into a child tonight, only made the ache sharper. Because as much as Cale had saved Sophia, he had also pulled open a wound Ethan had spent 12 years trying to stitch closed. He closed his eyes, and the past came flooding back. It had been raining that day. Not a thunderstorm, not dramatic, just the steady, endless drizzle that painted everything in shades of gray. Ethan remembered the call like it was etched into his bones. Missing child, trailer park, outside Lafayette, 3 years old, female, name, Lily Ward. He had gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened, siren blaring as he tore through wet streets. His daughter's name repeated in his head like a hammer. He hadn't seen her in months. Custody papers, court battles, bitter arguments had carved his family into pieces. His ex-wife had full custody. Ethan was just the man who visited on scheduled weekends, when his drinking hadn't left him too hollow to show up. By the time he reached the trailer park, patrol cars already lined the gravel. Neighbors huddled in plastic ponchos, whispers bleeding into the rain. And then he saw the washer, old, dented, its door cracked open like a jaw. Officers stood around it, faces set in the hard mask he recognized too well, the look of men who had seen the worst. One of them approached him gently, too gently. "She was inside," the officer said. "We think she climbed in during hide and seek, got stuck. It was quick." Quick. As if that word could soften anything. Ethan had pushed past them, dropped to his knees in the mud. They hadn't stopped him. How could they? As he pulled her small body into his arms. Lily's hair was damp, clinging to her cheeks. Her lips were pale. Her eyelids fluttered once, but didn't open. He rocked her against his chest, rainwater mixing with the tears he refused to believe were real. They said it was peaceful, someone told him later. She probably didn't feel much. But those were words for paperwork, not for fathers. The weeks after blurred into a spiral, bottles stacked in his kitchen like soldiers lined up to destroy him. Whiskey for sleep, beer for breakfast, anything to drown the silence. He stopped showing up for shifts, stopped answering calls. Court documents piled up, each one sharper than the last. Neglect. Unfit. Words that stripped him of what little remained. He lost custody of everything, of Lily's memory, of visitation, of the right even to claim himself as her father in anything but blood. He would wake at 3 a.m, the image of her in his arms replaying like a looped film. He'd pour another glass, and another. Friends stopped visiting. His captain gave him ultimatums he ignored. He was suspended once, nearly fired twice. He remembered one night, staring into the cracked bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the hollow-eyed man who stared back. "You killed her," the reflection hissed. "You weren't there." And he'd believed it. Now, 12 years later, in the dim light of his living room, Ethan rubbed his hands across his face. He could still smell the rain, still feel the damp weight of her in his arms. Sophia's rescue tonight had not erased anything. If anything, it had sharpened the contrast. One child saved, one forever gone. Kyle shifted in his sleep, a low whine escaping his throat. Ethan reached down, running his hand through the dog's fur. The warmth grounded him, kept him from slipping too far into the past. "You don't know what you did tonight," he murmured. "You don't know what it brought back." His voice cracked, but Kyle didn't stir. The dog's breath remained steady, like a metronome against the chaos of Ethan's mind. For a moment, Ethan let himself imagine. Imagine if Kale had been there 12 years ago. Imagine if a dog's nose and instinct had cut through the noise, had found Lily before it was too late. Maybe she would have been tucked into bed that night, clutching her toy, breathing. Maybe the years that followed would have been filled with birthday candles and laughter instead of whiskey and silence. But dogs couldn't rewrite history. They could only anchor men who'd lost themselves to it. Ethan leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling where shadows pooled in the corners. "I won't let it happen again," he whispered. The words weren't new. He'd said them before, to himself, to the memory of his daughter. But tonight they carried weight. Sophia's face, flushed red against the steel of the washer, had branded itself into him, and with it came the vow. Never again. Kyle stirred, shifting closer until his paw brushed against Ethan's boot. The simple contact steadied him. Ethan exhaled slowly. The house remained quiet, but no longer suffocating. The silence now was heavy with ghosts, yes, but also with a strange kind of grace. The kind born of second chances. And though sleep wouldn't come easy, Ethan knew the night had already changed him. Ethan sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the only light coming from the weak yellow bulb above the stove. A half-empty mug of coffee cooled untouched by his elbow. The house was quiet. Kyle snored faintly in the corner, but Ethan's mind was anything but still. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the washer door swing open. He saw Sophia's tiny body curled inside, her lips cracked, her arms locked tight around that bunny. And layered over that memory came another, older, heavier, and impossible to shake. Lily. Same stillness, same helplessness. One child pulled back from the brink, another lost forever. He dropped his head into his hands, fingers pressing against his temples. His breath shuddered. He knew that image of Sophia would haunt him, not because it was tragic, but because this time he'd been in time. The difference between life and death had been minutes. Kyle's bark, the pry bar, the ambulance. Seconds stacked like fragile dominoes. If one had toppled the wrong way, tonight would have ended the same as 12 years ago, with a child's story written in past tense. His chest tightened until it felt like he couldn't breathe. He pushed the coffee aside and stood abruptly, pacing across the kitchen floor. His footsteps were heavy, the boards creaking under his weight. Never again, he told himself. The words came sharp, almost violent, cutting through the fog of memory. Never another child. Never another parent living with that silence. It wasn't the first time he'd made that vow. But tonight, it felt different. Because tonight, for once, he hadn't failed. When Lily died, Ethan had spent years drowning in shame. He told himself he wasn't there, that it was fate, that accidents happened. But the truth rotted deeper. He hadn't been present in her life, not really. Court dates and custody hearings had painted him as unreliable, distracted, reckless. He'd believed he had time to fix himself, time to be the father she deserved. But time had run out. The guilt had eaten him alive. It followed him into every empty apartment, into every bar where he tried to forget. It echoed in every slammed door, every missed call, every courtroom where he stood powerless. He had built his own prison from regret. When the department offered him a chance at K-9 training years later, most saw it as punishment duty, long hours, endless drills, patience required that many officers lacked. but Ethan had grabbed it like a lifeline. Dogs didn't care about court documents or custody battles. Dogs didn't judge him for the past. They showed up every day, ready to work, ready to believe in him. He remembered his first canine partner, a stubborn shepherd named Atlas. The training had been brutal. Long nights, commands shouted into the dark, sweat stinging his eyes. But for the first time since Lily, Ethan felt purpose. He felt needed. Atlas would look at him with those amber eyes, waiting, trusting. That trust had forced Ethan to rebuild himself, piece by fragile piece. And when Kyle came into his life, sharp, precise, instinctive, it was as if fate had handed him a second chance. Not to save Lily. That was impossible, but to honor her memory by making sure no other child's laughter fell silent without someone fighting to bring it back. Tonight had proven the point in the harshest way. Sophia had been Lily's mirror. The same soft curls at her temples, the same small hands gripping a toy as if it were life itself. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that fate had twisted time, letting him see the same nightmare twice. But this time, the ending was different. And this time he arrived in time. He leaned against the counter, staring at the dark window above the sink. His reflection looked back. Older, harder, worn down by years of regret. But behind the exhaustion was something else. A spark. A reminder that his pain hadn't been wasted if it could light a way for someone else. He whispered, almost to himself, "You don't get to die unnoticed. Not while I'm still breathing." The words were a promise, one he carried deep in his bones. Every missing child's name on a dispatch call, every frantic parent's voice. He would treat them as if they were his own. Because once, he hadn't been enough for his daughter. He refused to let that be the end of his story. Cale stirred, lifting his head from the floor. His ears twitched, eyes glinting in the dim light. He studied Ethan for a long moment, silent, as if he knew the weight pressing down on the man's shoulders. Ethan crouched, resting his hands in the dog's thick fur. "You gave me back a second chance tonight," he murmured, voice breaking. "Don't think I don't know that." Cale's nose nudged against his palm, warm and grounding. The gesture was small, but it steadied Ethan more than words ever could. "You barked," Ethan continued, his throat tightening. "You barked when no one else knew. And because of that, she's still alive. Because of that, I got to rewrite one moment. Just one." He closed his eyes, forehead pressing against Cale's. For the first time in years, he allowed himself the fragile thought that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't condemned to repeat the same failure forever. But the guilt never vanished. It lingered, sharp as broken glass. It reminded him of what had been taken, what had been lost, what could never return. He didn't want it to vanish. He wanted it to burn, to carve itself into his resolve, because only then could it fuel him. Every child he saved was a whisper of redemption. Every siren, every call, every desperate minute was a chance to keep another parent from collapsing on a kitchen floor, sobbing into silence. Sophia was alive. Lily wasn't. Those truths lived side by side inside him, unchanging. But tonight proved something. Maybe he couldn't change the past, but he could fight like hell for the future. And he would. Until his last breath. The house had gone still again, the kind of stillness that pressed against the walls and made every tick of the clock sound louder than it should. Ethan sat alone at his dining table, a single lamp casting a circle of light across the wood. Kyle lay nearby, ears twitching even in sleep, as though his body refused to surrender fully to rest. Ethan's hands hovered over a cardboard box he hadn't opened in years. The corners were frayed, tape brittle with age. The label on the front, Ward, Lily, deceased, was written in black marker that had begun to fade. Just the sight of it made his throat tighten. For years he had avoided it, telling himself he'd find no comfort in old paper. But after Sophia, after the washer, after Kael's paws pounding against that steel door, the box felt less like a grave marker and more like a summons. He peeled the tape back, the sound sharp in the silence. Inside were folders, photographs, and reports. The weight of bureaucracy, clinical and cold. He spread them across the table. Each page, another shard of memory he'd tried to bury. The official report lay on top. Accidental death. Cause: asphyxiation inside household appliances. No evidence of foul play. Case closed. He read the words again, slower this time, and felt a prickle run up the back of his neck. No evidence of foul play. It was the kind of phrase he'd seen on dozens of files during his years on the force. Routine. Final. Yet tonight, it didn't sit right. Not after seeing Sophia in that same position, nearly lost because a washer's safety feature had locked. He turned to the timeline in the file. It stated Lily had been discovered at approximately 4:45 p.m. by a neighbor, found unresponsive inside the washer. EMS pronounced her deceased at 5:05 p.m. Ethan remembered arriving shortly after, rain soaking through his uniform, the siren still screaming in his ears. But something about the timing gnawed at him. He checked another document, an officer's field notes. The handwriting was sloppy, rushed. Child may have been inside for less than 10 minutes. Yet the autopsy summary listed significant hypoxia consistent with prolonged entrapment. 10 minutes. Prolonged. The words didn't align. Ethan rubbed a hand over his jaw, the rasp of stubble grounding him. He flipped to the next section. There should have been lab reports, standard procedure, especially for child fatalities. But there were only preliminary notes. Toxicology screen inconclusive, pending. No follow-up. No final lab submission. He felt his stomach sink. It wasn't just sloppy. It was unfinished. Why hadn't they followed through? He pulled a photograph from the envelope. Grainy, poorly lit. The washer sat in the corner of the trailer's cramped laundry room. Door ajar. The angle of the shot cut off half the frame. Ethan stared at it, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He knew this wasn't how they usually documented scenes. Angles were supposed to be systematic, wide, mid, close. Here, there was only one, rushed and careless, or intentional. He pushed the photo aside, his pulse picking up speed. He grabbed another sheet, flipping through witness statements. His ex-wife's voice appeared in typed words. She was playing hide and seek. I thought she was in her room. I found her too late. The testimony was flat, missing detail. No mention of timeline, of what Lily had said or done earlier. No officer's follow-up questions recorded. Ethan's mouth went dry. He remembered his ex-wife's face that day, pale, hollow-eyed. He had been too shattered to read between the lines back then. Now, years later, those omissions felt heavy. His eyes drifted to the corner of the page where the investigating officer's name was signed, Marcus Riker. The name hit him like a jolt. He knew it. He remembered Riker, not as a man of precision or care, but as someone who cut corners, who showed up late, who took the path of least resistance. A man Ethan had crossed paths with in his darker years. A man whose choices had once fed Ethan's own downward spiral. The knot in Ethan's chest tightened. What if Lily's case had been closed, not because the evidence proved it, but because no one cared enough to dig deeper? He leaned back in his chair, the documents fanned out before him like a jury. His hands trembled. For 12 years he had carried guilt like a stone, believing Lily's death was his failure alone. But now, staring at the inconsistencies, he felt something shift. Guilt still burned, but it mingled with something colder, sharper. Suspicion. Was it possible that his daughter's death wasn't an accident? That someone had written, "Case closed," not because it was true, but because it was convenient? He thought of Sophia again. Locked inside a machine, no one would have checked, if not for Kyle. How many others had been written off the same way? The silence of the house pressed closer, heavier. Kyle stirred, lifting his head, ears flicking, as if he sensed the change in Ethan's breathing. Ethan met the dog's gaze, and for the first time he whispered aloud the thought he had never dared to speak. What if Lily didn't climb in on her own? The words tasted bitter, but once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. Ethan gathered the papers into a stack, his jaw clenched. The evidence was thin, barely more than shadows between lines of ink, but shadows had weight, and tonight they whispered of something darker than accident. He placed Lily's photo at the top of the pile. Her smile was crooked, her hair tangled, her eyes bright. He traced the edges with his finger, his throat tight. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I should have seen it sooner." Kyle rose and padded over, resting his head on Ethan's knee. Ethan's hand dropped into the fur automatically, grounding himself in the warmth. "I don't know what happened to you," Ethan whispered to the photo, "but I swear I'll find out." It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was a seed of doubt, planted deep, its roots already stretching through him. He knew it would grow, twisting his path, pulling him toward truths he might not want to face. But he had no choice, not anymore. The invitation had come 2 days after Sophia's rescue, written in bright markers on construction paper and delivered by a teacher with watery eyes. "Sergeant Ward and Cale, would you come show our kids what real heroes look like?" Ethan hadn't wanted to. The idea of standing in front of children with eyes that could mirror Lily's or Sophia's, made his stomach twist. But he couldn't say no. Not when the school had turned the near tragedy into a lesson about safety, bravery, and the quiet partnership between man and dog. Not when Sophia herself had scribbled a thank you card with pink hearts and crooked letters. So that morning, Ethan parked the cruiser outside Maplewood Elementary, Cale's head sticking just slightly out the back window. The sound hit them before the doors even opened. Cheers, squeals, the bright clamor of childhood unfiltered. The front lawn had been sectioned off with orange cones, parents crowding along the edges with their phones raised high. Teachers wore wide smiles, holding back groups of eager students who craned their necks for a better view. The air smelled of sunscreen and cut grass, and somewhere, a cafeteria worker was baking cookies that sent a warm, sweet note drifting through the breeze. Kyle leapt from the cruiser first, landing with the grace of a creature born for command. His ears pricked forward, eyes scanning the crowd, posture calm but alert. The children erupted in a wave of cheers, voices overlapping. "There he is! That's the dog from the news! Cale! Cale!" Some chanted his name as though he were a sports hero stepping onto a field. Phones clicked, video cameras rolled, and for a moment, the world blurred into the sound of applause. Ethan followed, adjusting his vest, the sun glaring off his badge. He kept his jaw set, his stride measured. Outwardly, he looked like the officer they expected, steady, proud, controlled. Inwardly, his chest tightened with every cheer. He didn't belong in spotlights. He knew what it was like to fail, to fall, to lose. Cameras couldn't see the cracks. He clipped Kyle's harness as the principal, a small woman with boundless enthusiasm, bounded forward, microphone in hand. "Friends, today we welcome a true hero and his incredible partner," she beamed. "Sergeant Ward and Cale saved little Sophia Miller, one of our very own, and today they're here to show us what teamwork and bravery look like." Another cheer. Little hands clapped, sneakers stomped on asphalt. Kale stood unbothered by the noise, his tail swaying gently, tongue lolling in quiet contentment. His eyes swept the crowd not for adoration, but for patterns, movement, scent, anything that stood out. The dog didn't crave fame. He sought order. Ethan knelt briefly at Kyle's side, running a hand down his fur, grounding himself. Then he rose to speak. "I'm not sure about the word hero," he said into the mic, his voice low but carrying. "But I can tell you this, Kyle doesn't hesitate. He doesn't judge. He just shows up. And sometimes, that's what makes the difference." The honesty in his tone stilled the crowd for a beat before the applause returned, softer this time, more reverent. Parents lowered their phones, exchanging glances. Teachers nodded. Children's eyes widened. The demonstration began. Ethan guided Kyle through simple obedience drills: sit, stay, heel, commands delivered in crisp tones, answered with flawless precision. The kids gasped when Kale leapt over cones, when he stopped mid-sprint at a single word. They squealed when Ethan tossed a toy and Kale caught it mid-air with a snap of his jaws. But Ethan noticed something else. Amid the excitement, Kale's focus never wavered. His ears flicked toward a sudden cough. His eyes followed a janitor pushing a mop bucket across the lot. His nose lifted once when the wind shifted. Even in celebration, the dog's instincts never shut off. Ethan envied that. For him, instincts were messy, clouded by memory and regret. Kyle's were pure, precise, unburdened. Near the end, Sophia herself was brought forward, shy behind her mother's leg. She clutched her bunny, cleaned but still frayed, and her eyes shone with both fear and wonder. Kyle lowered himself gently to the ground as she approached, his body language calm, his gaze steady. Slowly, Sophia reached out a small hand and placed it on his head. The crowd hushed. Phones clicked, capturing the moment. Ethan felt the sting of tears behind his eyes, but forced them back. He couldn't let them see. Laura whispered. She wanted to thank him. Sophia leaned close, her voice barely audible, but caught on a nearby microphone. Thank you for finding me. Kyle blinked slowly, exhaled, and pressed his head into her palm. It was nothing dramatic, nothing staged, but in that quiet nudge, something unspoken passed between them. Trust, gratitude, survival. The crowd erupted again, clapping until their hands reddened. Teachers wiped tears. Parents lowered their phones, some placing hands over their hearts. Ethan forced a smile, nodding at the sea of faces, but inside, he felt the weight of it pressing down. They celebrated a miracle, but he knew miracles often lived one step away from tragedy. He knew how thin the line was, how easily it snapped. When the event ended, children swarmed Kyle, hands eager to stroke his fur, voices calling his name. Ethan let them, standing back, arms crossed, watching. Kyle absorbed the chaos with serene patience, tail sweeping in slow arcs. Parents approached Ethan, shaking his hand, thanking him. You're a blessing to this town. You gave us hope. You saved one of ours. He nodded, deflecting, murmuring that Kyle deserved the credit, but their praise slid off him like rain. As the crowd thinned, Ethan caught his reflection in a classroom window. For a moment, he saw not the celebrated officer, but the man who had once crumpled in the rain, holding his lifeless daughter. He turned away, throat tight. Kyle trotted back to him, ears perked, eyes calm. Ethan crouched, gripping the dog's harness. They can call us heroes all they want, he whispered, too low for anyone else to hear. But you and I both know the truth. We're just trying to make up for the ones we lost. Kale blinked, leaned closer, and for a moment, Ethan let himself believe that was enough. The event had settled into a rhythm. Children laughed and clapped as Kale bounded over cones and stopped mid-run at Ethan's sharp command. Parents kept their phones raised, capturing every leap and bark, while the principal narrated with bright, animated commentary. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. The chaos of the last week, the washer, the hospital, the nights alone with Lily's ghost, felt distant here. Surrounded by bright-eyed children and hopeful parents, it almost seemed possible that life could be ordinary again. But Kyle shattered that illusion in an instant. They were wrapping up the last drill when Ethan noticed the change. Kyle froze mid-step, body stiffening as if turned to stone. His ears snapped forward, his nose lifted, and a low rumble vibrated from his chest. The shift was subtle to most. Just a dog pausing, maybe distracted. But Ethan knew better. He'd seen Kyle in this posture before. Muscles coiled, eyes locked, every nerve tuned to something unseen. The crowd cheered, oblivious. Children clapped, believing the pause part of the performance. But Ethan felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, low enough that only Kyle could hear. The shepherd didn't respond with a wag or a whine. Instead, he turned his head sharply toward the far side of the building. The maintenance wing, a squat, windowless stretch of brick half hidden behind the gym. Kale took 2 steps, nose twitching, tail stiff. Then he glanced back at Ethan, eyes sharp, waiting. Ethan's stomach tightened. Protocol said to end the demo, thank the crowd, pack it up. But Kale wasn't the kind of dog to spook at shadows. If he was signaling now, it meant something was there. Ethan clipped the leash to Kale's harness, masking the move as part of the show. "One last trick," he told the crowd, forcing a smile. "Kale's favorite, search mode." Cheers erupted again, children bouncing in excitement. But as soon as they moved beyond the cones, Ethan's face hardened. His hand brushed the radio at his shoulder. "Stay close," he whispered. Kale pulled forward, methodical, nose skimming the air. His nails clicked against the pavement, each sound sharp in Ethan's ears. They rounded the corner, leaving behind the laughter and applause. The noise dulled, replaced by the hollow quiet of the side lot. Here, the air felt different, cooler, heavier. A faint chemical tang rode the breeze, mixed with the smell of cleaning supplies and damp concrete. Kale's nose worked furiously, his pace quickening as they neared a narrow door marked maintenance. He stopped suddenly, head low, ears rigid. His growl was deep, guttural, a sound that made Ethan's pulse spike. Ethan tested the door handle, locked. He glanced back toward the main lot. The principal was still talking, her voice drifting faintly through the PA system. No one had noticed their absence yet. Kale barked once, sharp and insistent. The sound echoed against the brick walls, too loud to ignore. Ethan crouched, his voice low and steady. "What do you smell?" Kale pawed at the doorframe, nose pressing against the crack at the bottom. Then he froze again, muscles taut, tail stiff as iron. Ethan had seen this exact body language before, on the night Sophia had been pulled from the washer. His chest tightened. Something, or someone, was in there. He radioed quickly, keeping his voice controlled. "Ward, side wing, maintenance room, K9 alert." "Investigating." Static crackled back, but no immediate reply. Ethan unclipped the leash, meeting Kale's eyes. "All right, show me." The shepherd didn't hesitate. He lowered himself closer to the ground, growl deepening. His body leaned forward, every line of muscle screaming with intent. Ethan's hand hovered near his holster as he pressed his shoulder to the door. He gave it a shove, solid, reinforced. Another push, harder. The hinges groaned but held. He swore under his breath. Whoever locked it hadn't intended for anyone to wander inside. Cale barked again, claws scraping against the steel. His urgency left no room for doubt. "Against protocol," Ethan muttered. His captain's voice rang in his memory. "Stick to procedure. Don't act without backup." But protocol had nearly cost Sophia her life. He stepped back, braced his boot, and slammed it against the door. The frame rattled, paint flaking. Kyle barked louder, pressing against the gap as if to force it open himself. Another kick. Metal groaned, screws loosening. "Move," Ethan ordered. Kyle shifted just enough for Ethan to ram the door one final time. The latch snapped, the door swinging inward with a metallic shriek. The air inside was thick, stale, tinged with something sour. The room was dim, lined with shelves of bleach bottles, paper towels, mop handles. At first glance, it looked empty. But Kyle didn't move. He stood rigid in the doorway, eyes fixed on the far corner. His growl deepened, echoing in the confined space. Ethan followed his gaze. Shadows piled behind a stack of rolled gym mats. The smell hit him then. Sweat, fear, something human beneath the bleach. His pulse hammered. He stepped inside slowly, Cale at his side, the shepherd's body a live wire of tension. And that was when he heard it. A sound too soft for most ears, but unmistakable to him. A muffled thump. Then another. Then a tiny, stifled cry. "Help!" Ethan's breath caught. He exchanged a glance with Kyle. The dog's body surged forward, nose to the mats, claws scraping against the concrete. Whatever was behind them, it was alive. The cry was so faint, Ethan almost thought he'd imagined it, but Kyle didn't. The shepherd lunged at the mats, claws tearing fabric, his body rigid with certainty. Ethan shoved the rolls aside, each one thudding against the wall, until the corner was bare. There it was, a large blue storage bin, tipped halfway onto its side. Its lid was snapped shut, though holes had been drilled crudely along the top, jagged circles that reeked of desperation. The faint sound of breathing scraped from inside. "God," Ethan muttered, his chest tightening. He dropped to his knees, fingers finding the latches. They resisted at first, plastic stiff and warped. He cursed under his breath, bracing one hand against the floor as he yanked the lid free. The sight inside stole his breath. A boy, maybe 7 years old, curled into himself like something discarded. His wrists were cinched with plastic zip ties, his ankles bound the same way. Gray duct tape sealed his mouth, his cheeks flushed and streaked with sweat. His small chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, each one trembling. For a split second, Ethan froze. The image cut too close. Lily's face, Sophia's tiny body in the washer, all the ghosts tangled in one. But training surged through him. He pulled his knife from his belt, slicing the ties in quick strokes. "It's okay," he murmured, voice breaking despite himself. "You're safe now. I've got you." The boy flinched but didn't fight, too weak to resist. His eyes, wide, glassy, ringed with red, locked on Ethan's. They weren't the eyes of a stranger. They were the eyes of a child who'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to notice. Kyle pressed close, nose brushing the boy's leg, a low whine humming in his throat. The child's gaze flicked to the dog, and something shifted. His trembling eased, his chest hitched once like a sob, and he leaned ever so slightly toward the shepherd's presence. Ethan peeled the duct tape from his mouth slowly, careful not to tear skin. The boy gasped, sucking air into raw lungs. His first word, rasped out broken, but clear. "Help." "You've got it," Ethan said, scooping the boy into his arms. His weight was startling, too light, bones sharp under skin. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Whoever had done this hadn't cared if the child survived. The radio at his shoulder crackled as backup finally arrived. "Ward, status?" Ethan pressed the button with his free hand. "Child located, alive, requiring immediate medical." His voice was clipped, but the tremor underneath bled through. He carried the boy out of the dim maintenance room, Kyle pacing beside him like a soldier on guard. The hallway felt longer than it should, each step echoing. When they emerged onto the schoolyard, the world erupted. Children gasped, teachers shouted, parents surged forward. Phones shot into the air, capturing shaky video as Ethan strode across the asphalt, the boy limp in his arms. The duct tape, the red wrists, the shallow breaths, all of it was on display. The principal clapped a hand over her mouth. A teacher sobbed openly. A dozen voices overlapped. "Who is he? Is he alive? Oh God, oh God!" Ethan lowered the boy onto the stretcher EMTs had rushed forward with. They swarmed, clipping monitors, securing IV lines, wrapping blankets. The boy's eyes fluttered but stayed open, following Kyle even as strangers worked around him. Kyle stood at Ethan's side, tail still, ears high. His gaze never left the child. Then, like a ripple through the crowd, the whisper began. "Another miracle dog." The words carried from one parent to another, from one teacher to the next. "That's the dog who found Sophia. He did it again. That dog saved another child." Phones caught it all. Kyle stiff in his harness, Ethan kneeling briefly to steady the boy's shoulder, the EMTs rushing him toward the ambulance. The whispers grew louder, no longer whispers at all. "He's more than a police dog. He's a hero." Ethan's throat tightened. He stood back, letting the medics do their work, one hand resting unconsciously on Kyle's neck. The shepherd leaned into the touch, but didn't break his focus. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sirens wailing as it sped away. The crowd's murmur swelled into something heavier. Fear, awe, relief tangled together. Children clutched their parents. Parents clutched each other. And in the middle of it stood Ethan and Kyle, the unlikely center of a storm neither had asked for. Ethan bent low, pressing his forehead briefly to Kyle's. "Twice," he whispered, voice rough. "2 children in 1 week." Kyle blinked, silent. It should have felt like redemption. Instead, it felt like a door creaking open on something darker. Because twice wasn't a coincidence. Twice meant pattern. Ethan straightened, meeting the eyes of the crowd. Their gratitude, their reverence, their whispered word, miracle, pressed heavy on his shoulders. But deep inside, another word gnawed at him. Why? Why had Sophia ended up in that washer? Why was a boy bound and hidden in a school maintenance room, air holes drilled with cruel precision? Kyle had found both. But what if someone had meant for them not to be found at all? The precinct at night had its own heartbeat. By day, the halls buzzed with phones, chatter, and radios. Past midnight, the noise collapsed into silence, broken only by the vending machine's hum and the shuffle of boots from passing patrols. Ethan sat alone under a desk lamp, 2 files open before him. 2 names, 2 children. Sophia Miller, Tyler Monroe. He had read them a dozen times. Sophia, 5 years old, vanished from her yard at 5:32, recovered alive at 5:47, sealed inside a washer. Case closed as accidental entrapment. Tyler, 7, missing from school, found bound inside a blue storage bin in a maintenance room. Case open as abduction. 2 children, 2 traps. Both silenced. Both hidden in places no one would think to search. Both were found only because Kyle, his German shepherd, refused to give up. Ethan rubbed his eyes. He'd been on shift for 12 hours, but rest was impossible with these images burned into him. Sophia's flushed face against steel, Tyler's wrists raw from zip ties. He jotted notes. Hidden locations, confinement, silence, time, a critical factor. Then underlined. Not random. The reports insisted Sophia had crawled inside during play, but Ethan knew how washers locked and how unlikely it was a 5-year-old would close herself in without a sound. Tyler's case was different only in degree. Duct tape, zip ties, drilled air holes. That wasn't a chance. That was preparation. Beside him, Kyle stirred, amber eyes opening. Ethan bent to scratch his fur. "You don't lose sleep," he murmured. "You just know." The dog's steady presence anchored him. Together, they had learned to trust instinct. It was instinct that told Ethan Lily's case. His daughter's death years ago was never as simple as it looked. The break room clock blinked past 1:30 when Riley walked in, carrying fresh coffee. The rookie hesitated, then sat across from Ethan. Cale lay at his feet, eyes half closed but never quite asleep. "Couldn't sleep either?" Riley asked. "Sleep's overrated?" Ethan's tone was flat. For a while they sat in silence. Then Riley nodded toward the shepherd. "How does he do it?" "I've studied canines, but Cale, it's different." Ethan ran his fingers through Cale's fur. "Part of it's science. 70 times our scent receptors. They read chemicals, body heat, even fear, but not all of it. Sometimes he reacts before I can explain why. A shift in the air, a silence. Call it instinct. You make it sound supernatural. Not supernatural, just unexplainable." The rookie hesitated, then leaned in. Or maybe it's not instinct at all. Maybe someone's staging these. Ethan froze. Riley pressed on, voice low. "Sophia locked in a washer. Tyler bound in a bin with drilled air holes. 2 impossible hiding places in a week. What are the odds? What if someone's engineering them to look accidental, and Cale's the only one cutting through the disguise?" The words landed like a blow. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had circled that thought himself, but hearing it aloud chilled him. Lily's death had been ruled an accident too, written off, left to gather dust. "You're saying someone put those kids there on purpose," Ethan said. "It's possible," Riley answered. "Too many coincidences, too much precision. Kids don't seal themselves in machines." "And who hides a child in a crowded school unless they want him found? Alive?" Ethan gripped his mug, knuckles white. He wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but the seed had already taken root. He looked at his notes. Hidden, silenced, found just in time. Riley wasn't wrong. He just wasn't sure he was ready to face what it meant. Finally, he stacked the files. "Go home, Riley." "What about you?" "I'll be here." The rookie left reluctantly. Ethan stayed, staring at the empty doorway. Kyle pressed against his leg, grounding him again. Ethan whispered the word that now fit too well. Staged. Later, the house greeted him with silence too deep to ignore. Kyle followed close, refusing his usual bed. Ethan drifted past the living room and stopped before the hallway closet. His hand rested on the knob. He hadn't opened it in years, not since he sealed away Lily's belongings, trying to live outside a mausoleum of memory. Tonight, Riley's words and his own gnawing suspicion pulled him back. The hinges groaned as he opened the door. 3 cardboard boxes sat inside. The top bore a name in his handwriting. Lily. He lowered to his knees and pulled it out. Inside, a stuffed giraffe, with one ear chewed flat. A plastic tea set, pink sneakers scuffed at the toes, and photographs. He lifted one, Lily, in a yellow sundress, missing 2 teeth, holding the giraffe as if she'd just told the world a secret. His eyes stung, vision blurring. Another photo showed her on the trailer steps, the washer faintly visible in the background. His jaw clenched. "Everything about you was dismissed," he whispered, "and I let them." Kyle shifted beside him. Ethan reached without thinking, placing the shepherd's paw on Lily's photo. The sight nearly broke him. His living partner bridging the past and the present, memory and hope. "You found Sophia," he whispered. "You found Tyler. Maybe you can help me see what I missed with her." The decision hardened in his chest. He would reopen Lily's case, not officially. The department would call it grief, maybe suspend him, but unofficially, quietly, he could follow the threads everyone else had ignored. He pressed his hand over Kael's paw, sealing the vow. "We're going to find out what really happened, no matter where it leads." Kael exhaled, steady, grounding. Ethan gathered the photos into a folder and left the toys behind. This wasn't about reopening wounds. It was about chasing truth. Back in the living room, he set the folder on his desk beside Sophia's thank you note and Tyler's report. 3 children now tied together by silence and hidden places. 3 reasons to keep digging. Exhaustion weighed heavy, but resolve weighed heavier. Ethan switched off the lamp, darkness filling the room. Kael pressed close at his side. Ethan whispered the words he should have spoken 12 years ago. "I won't let you be forgotten." And with that, the mission was no longer private. It had begun. The archives were buried deep in the precinct basement, where mildew clung to the walls and time itself seemed to gather dust. Ethan descended with Kael at his side, the shepherd's nails tapping against concrete. For Ethan, it felt less like a records room than a tomb of forgotten stories. The door groaned open. Inside, rows of steel shelves stretched into flickering fluorescent light. Ethan pulled on gloves and began searching. He wasn't here for Lily's file alone. Instinct told him there were others. He stopped at a box marked Juvenile Cases, 2010. Inside, faded folders, children's names scrawled across tabs. He skimmed until the words struck him like blows. Accidental drowning, backyard pool, suffocation, refrigerator unit, ruled an accident. The child was found locked inside the car. No foul play suspected. His chest tightened. Case after case. Each one dismissed, each child hidden in confined spaces, washers, trunks, closets, always between ages 5 and 8, always explained away as misadventure. Ethan's pen scratched furiously across a notepad. Ella Johnson, 6, refrigerator, 2009. Matthew Klein, 5, sedan trunk, 2012. Holly Ramirez, 8, closet, 2014. He flipped through more. Crawl spaces, dryers, abandoned houses. The refrain repeated. No evidence of foul play. 9 cases in 10 years. 9 children were silenced. "This isn't random," Ethan muttered. Kael lifted his head, amber eyes steady, as if to confirm what Ethan already knew. He packed the files carefully into his satchel, leaving the shelves to look untouched. But as he turned, a shiver ran down his spine. The basement felt heavier, like unseen eyes tracked him between the shelves. Kael angled toward a dark corner, ears sharp. Ethan called out, but the silence pressed back. He switched off the light and climbed the stairs, Kyle close, satchel heavy with names. Lily's death wasn't an anomaly, it was part of a pattern, and patterns meant intent. At home, the kitchen table had become a war room. Files sprawled across it in uneven stacks, photographs clipped to corners, his notepad scrawled with dates and names. The lamp threw long shadows over the chaos. He spread the cases by year, 2009, 2010, 2012, 2014, 2015, 2017. Each the same, children aged 5 to 8, trapped in silence, Lily among them. He drew lines between names, towns, and years. 6 towns, all within driving distance. He circled Lily's name and drew a line to Sophia's, both found in washers 12 years apart. Coincidence didn't stretch that far. Then his pen stopped. A name appeared again and again on old reports. Detective Marcus Riker, listed as responding officer on Ella Johnson, consultant on Matthew Klein, again on Holly Ramirez. Ethan's pulse hammered. Riker. The name carried the taste of old distrust. He leaned forward, voice a low growl. Someone's been staging this. For years. Cale's ears flicked. Ethan placed Lily's photo in the center of the table, beside Sophia's crayon note and Tyler's hospital intake sheet. 3 children, 3 voices he could not ignore. He wrote across the page in bold letters, "This is not over." The next morning, exhaustion clung to him as he walked into the precinct, satchel over his shoulder, Kyle trotting close. To everyone else, it was another day. For Ethan, every face felt less trustworthy, every sound muted beneath the weight of what he carried. Halfway to his desk, a voice stopped him. "Ward, got a second?" It was Frank Delaney, retired detective, gray and carved by years on the job. He jerked his head toward the hallway. They walked together past the squad room, down near the evidence lockers where the chatter faded. "I've been hearing things," Delaney said quietly. "About the files you've been digging into. Old cases, kids in washers, closets, cars." Ethan said nothing. Delaney exhaled, shoulders sagging. "Look, Ward, some doors are better left closed." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Better left closed for who? The kids who died? The parents are still waiting for answers?" Delaney's eyes hardened. "For you, for your sanity. I know what happened with your daughter. I know this isn't just about cases. It's about guilt, and that'll eat you alive." The mention of Lily hit like a punch, but Ethan forced his voice steady. "You think I don't know what guilt feels like? I've lived with it for 12 years. But this," he tapped his satchel, "this is a pattern. Too many accidents. Too many kids written off." Delaney's voice sharpened. "Then hear me. People higher than you decided those cases were done. They don't want old ghosts dragged into the light. Push too far, and you'll find yourself on the wrong side of the line. Or worse." The warning hung heavy in the stairwell. "Why tell me this?" Ethan asked. "Because I owe you, and I don't want to watch another cop burn out chasing shadows, or another dog." His glance at Cale softened briefly, then hardened again. "Put the box back. Forget the names. Forget the patterns. Do your job." He clapped Ethan's shoulder and walked away. Ethan stood in silence, the weight of the warning pressing down. But instead of extinguishing the fire, it only fanned it. He crouched beside Kyle. "What do you think? Drop it? Pretend it's a coincidence?" Kyle's amber eyes met his steadily, unblinking. Ethan almost laughed, low and bitter. "Yeah, that's what I thought." He straightened, tightening his grip on the satchel. Delaney was right about one thing. Doors like this led to dangerous places. But Ethan had already stepped through, and there was no turning back. The road narrowed as Ethan drove east, asphalt splitting into jagged seams. Streetlights vanished, leaving only the cruiser's headlights carving a pale corridor through the dark. Kyle shifted in the passenger seat, ears twitching. He felt it too, the ghosts thickening as they neared Evansville. The sign appeared. Evansville Trailer Park. Lot rentals available. Chipped, weathered, mocking. Ethan slowed, the gravel crunching like bones under the tires. The trailers slumped against the night, aluminum siding rusted in streaks. A tricycle lay on its side near the steps of one, weeds half swallowing its wheels. Ethan froze, memory slamming him. Lily's laughter in this very yard, her voice calling, "Daddy, push me higher!" And then the silence that followed, when she was found inside the washer. Kyle pulled ahead, nose low, leading Ethan to the laundry block. The air reeked of mildew and detergent, unchanged after 12 years. The shepherd halted at the corner washer, growling low. Ethan's chest tightened. 12 years, he whispered, palm on the cold metal. And you still know. Ghosts pressed in, but Ethan steadied himself on Kyle's fur. She's not here anymore. But whoever put her there, they might still be. Back outside, the trailer park had gone silent. Ethan leaned against the cruiser, a dead cigarette between his fingers. Then he saw it. By the fence line, a tall figure in a dark coat, unmoving, watching. Ethan stepped forward, Kyle stiffening beside him. "Evening," Ethan called. The man didn't respond. Instead, he turned, calm, deliberate, and vanished between trailers. Ethan and Kyle gave chase, but the lane was empty. No prints, no sound, just shadows. "They're watching us," Ethan whispered, Kyle pressing against his leg. "Means we're getting close." The precinct library smelled of old paper and mildew. Ethan sat hunched at a long oak table, files spread like a storm, Kyle at his feet. For hours, Ethan had scoured reports, eyes burning. And then he saw it. A name, buried in margins and footnotes. Consulting officer, date, Marcus Riker. Report reviewed by Riker. Witness interview conducted by Riker. The name surfaced in Ella Johnson's refrigerator case, in Matthew Klein's trunk entrapment, in Holly Ramirez's closet, suffocation. 3 towns, 3 years, always the same name lingering at the edges. Ethan wrote it in block letters across his notepad. Marcus Riker. The name wasn't abstract. It was personal. He remembered Riker, an ex-cop stripped of his badge, a fixer in the shadows, when Ethan's grief had driven him into bottles and pills, a man who thrived on despair, a man Ethan had once taken things from, too broken to care. His hands shook as he flipped Lily's file. There it was, Riker's handwriting scrawled in the margins. Accidental entrapment, case closed. The pen slipped from Ethan's grip. His throat closed. It was him, he whispered. He touched her case. He called it an accident. The pieces snapped together. The confined spaces, the repetition of no foul play, the erasures, and Riker's name threading them together like a signature. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was intentional, and it had touched Lily. Anger and grief collided. Ethan thought of the years he'd lost drowning himself, the badge he almost surrendered, the daughter whose file had been dismissed like a clerical error, and behind it all, Marcus Riker. Cale nudged his leg, steadying him. Ethan whispered, "Looks like the ghosts finally have a name." He gathered the files, notes sprawled with children's names and dates, every line now tethered to Riker. The name was no longer just ink on a page. It was flesh. A man with history, motive, and shadows deep enough to hide children for over a decade. Ethan pressed his palm to Kyle's back, steady but cold with resolve. "This isn't a coincidence," he said. "It never was." The library's silence hummed around him, but Ethan knew he had crossed the line. Research was no longer a curiosity, it was a pursuit. And Marcus Riker was no longer a ghost. He was alive. Watching. Waiting. The call came just after dusk. Unit 23. Domestic disturbance. 41 Ridgeway. Children may be present. Those 4 words locked Ethan's grip on the pen. He closed the folder and answered, "Copy." Kale was already rising from under the desk, body taut, eyes burning with readiness. The drive was short. Ridgeway Apartments loomed. Old brick, windows patched with plastic, rents cheap, tempers hot. Even from the lot, Ethan heard the shouting, the crash of something breaking. Kale growled low in the passenger seat. "Easy," Ethan murmured, though his own pulse hammered. Upstairs, a child's cry cut through the walls. Ethan kicked in the door. The apartment reeked of booze. Furniture lay overturned. 2 children huddled beneath a table, clinging to each other, faces streaked with tears. Kyle placed himself between them and the hallway, a wall of snarling muscle. A man stumbled out of the bedroom, tattoos snaking down his arms, a broken bottle glinting in his grip. His eyes were glassy, but dangerous. "Drop it," Ethan ordered. The man sneered. "You think that mutt scares me?" Kale's bark shook the walls. The bottle slipped, shattering. Ethan moved fast, cuffs clamping around wrists as Kale held the line. "You don't know who you're messing with," the man hissed. Ethan ignored him, focusing on the children. The girl reached trembling fingers to Kyle's fur. The boy whispered, "Doggie's not scared." Ethan's chest tightened. "That's right," he said softly. "He's not scared of anyone." Backup hauled the suspect out. EMTs carried the kids downstairs. But Ethan stayed uneasy. The threat had felt different, like a message. He swept the apartment again. A half-closed bedroom door. Kale froze at it, growling low. Ethan's hand went to his weapon. He kicked the door open. And there he was. Marcus Riker. Older now. Hair clipped short. Eyes harder, but unmistakable. A pistol dangled in his hand, loose but far from harmless. "Ward," Riker drawled. "Didn't expect you tonight." "Drop it," Ethan said, gun leveled. Riker smirked. "That's how you greet an old friend. Who slipped you your first pills? Who told you the badge didn't matter if you couldn't sleep?" Memories surged. Riker in back alleys, feeding his grief when Lily died. Ethan's jaw clenched. "I remember. I also remember Ella, Matthew, Holly, Lily." That name cracked the air like glass. Riker's smirk faltered. "You don't know the game you're playing," he warned. "I know enough. Kids suffocating in closets, cars, washers, your name in every margin." The room went taut. Kyle's growl vibrated like thunder. Finally, Riker crouched, set the pistol on the floor. Ethan cuffed him against the wall. "You think this ends with me?" Riker whispered, venom soft. "You're chasing something bigger. You'll wish you left it buried." Ethan said nothing. Kale stood steady, amber eyes locked on the man like he saw every lie. Later, the precinct hummed with its midnight rhythm. Ethan sat at his desk, Cale at his feet, folders piled high. Riker's name ran through them like a stain. The deeper he dug, the darker it became. Riker wasn't just a ghost from Ethan's past. He surfaced in foster homes as a guardian, in churches as a youth volunteer, as an emergency contact for families across Indiana. Always near children. Always near tragedies, later written off as accidents. A boy fell into a freezer. A girl wandered into a closet. Each time, the reports ended the same. No foul play suspected. Each time, Riker's name lingered at the edges. Ethan scrawled notes furiously. 2009, Ella Johnson, refrigerator, foster home, tied to Riker. 2011, Lily Ward, washer, Riker patrolled the neighborhood. 2012, Matthew Klein, trunk. Caseworker listed Riker as acquaintance. 2014, Holly Ramirez, closet, youth group linked to Riker. 2023, Sophia Miller, washer, Nashville suburb. 2023, Tyler Monroe, storage bin, school event. Patterns spread like cracks across his pad. Riker's shadow had been there from the start, circling the most vulnerable, including Ethan. Cale whined softly. Ethan reached down, grounding himself in the shepherd's warmth. His gaze fell on Lily's photo, paper-clipped to her file. 12 years later, the report still read, "Accidental entrapment. Case closed." Riley appeared in the doorway with a steaming coffee. He glanced at the files. "All this, it's Riker?" "Everywhere I look," Ethan muttered. "Different towns, different kids, same patterns. He hides in plain sight." Riley shook his head. "But nothing sticks. No charges. No trials. That's the point. He's careful. Always close enough to touch the fire without burning." Riley hesitated. "So what now?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at Lily's photo again, then at Cale's unblinking eyes. "Now, we don't stop. Not until every door he closed gets opened again." Riley paled. "That kind of digging. You've been warned. It's dangerous." "Warnings only mean you're close," Ethan said. Riley left without arguing. Ethan stayed. The files spread before him, Kyle steady at his side. The ghosts weren't ghosts anymore. They had a name, a face. He whispered the vow under his breath, meant for Lily, for every child buried in silence. "This ends with him." Kyle lifted his head, amber eyes catching the lamplight, as if he understood. The first sign wasn't the siren, it was the sky. Driving back from the station, Ethan noticed the green-gray haze pressing low over Evansville, the kind of color Midwesterners knew meant trouble. Leaves swirled upward against the wind. Thunder rolled deep like the earth itself growling. Kyle whined from the passenger seat, ears pricked. Then the radio crackled. "Tornado watch in effect for Vanderburgh County. Shelter protocols engaged." By the time the sirens wailed, the streets were already unraveling. Families rushed outside, clutching children, backpacks, and pets. Ethan pulled into the lot of a Methodist church serving as a shelter. Lightning split the sky as he ushered people inside, Kyle cutting through panic with his commanding presence. The shepherd guided a crying child back to her mother, nudged an elderly man upright, barked until space cleared for those too small to push through. Inside, cots filled fast. Volunteers shouted for order. A breathless voice told Ethan the shelter manager had gone to retrieve her son from the trailer park and never returned. Ethan's jaw tightened. His duty was here, but he knew what it meant to risk everything for a child. Cale barked once, decisive. "All right," Ethan muttered. "We go." The storm hit like a wall, rain slashing sideways, debris whipping across the road. Kyle pressed forward through flooded streets, his nose leading, body braced against the gale. Aluminum siding ripped from houses, roofs buckled, stop signs snapped and spun away. By the time they reached the trailer park, destruction was everywhere. One unit lay crumpled, walls flattened outward, toys scattered across mud. Kyle barked once, sharp, then leapt onto the wreckage. Ethan followed, digging with raw hands as the shepherd clawed at the debris. "Search!" Ethan shouted. Kyle froze at a collapsed beam, barking furiously. Ethan tore away plaster until he found a sneaker, then a boy curled under a table, pinned but breathing. With a heave, he lifted the beam enough to drag the child free. The boy clung to him, trembling, fingers digging into his soaked uniform. "You're safe," Ethan whispered, voice breaking. Cale pressed close, licking the boy's cheek. EMTs rushed in, pulling the child to safety. But Kyle wasn't done. He darted back into the ruins, barking again, pawing at another collapsed section. Ethan grabbed a crowbar, prying upward. A muffled cry rose from beneath the wreckage. Together with firefighters, he hauled debris aside until a pale hand appeared. Another boy, trapped at the hip, gasping shallow breaths. "Hold on, kid," Ethan roared. With Cale marking the spot, they jacked up the beam and pulled him free. The child sobbed into Ethan's chest, Cale shielding him from the storm. Across the street, a news cameraman had captured it all. A soaked officer holding a child alive in his arms, and a German shepherd pressed against them, unyielding in the rain. Ethan barely noticed. He was too focused on the boy's fragile breaths, on the small fingers tangled in Kyle's fur, until EMTs carried him away. Lightning lit the ruins, sirens wailed, but one truth cut through. Kale had found them. He had refused to leave until silence was broken, and children were safe. Ethan pressed a hand to the shepherd's drenched coat, voice low and raw. "You did it again." Kyle leaned into him, unshaken, as the storm raged on. By dawn, the footage would sweep across the country under headlines. "Hero dog saves boy in tornado wreckage." But for Ethan, in that moment, it was simpler. A life pulled from ruin, a partner who never faltered, and the vow that as long as Kyle stood beside him, no child would be left to suffocate in silence. The City Hall auditorium smelled faintly of polish and politics. Rows of chairs stretched toward a stage draped in flags, the kind of arrangement built less for comfort than for photographs. The air buzzed with conversation, the low hum of anticipation broken only by the stutter of camera shutters as reporters jockeyed for position. Ethan adjusted the stiff collar of his uniform, the fabric starched enough to feel like armor. Kyle sat at his side, calm despite the chaos, his amber eyes steady as they swept the crowd. To the shepherd, this was just another room to scan, another mission to sit through. But for Ethan, the weight of the moment pressed heavier with every clap on his shoulder, every handshake he hadn't asked for. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor's voice rang out, amplified by the echoing acoustics. "Tonight, we honor courage, the kind that rises in the face of chaos, that saves lives when seconds matter." Applause rippled through the hall. Ethan stood motionless, Kyle leaning slightly against his leg, grounding him. The governor took the podium next, his voice polished, his smile rehearsed. "We are gathered here to present the Medal of Valor to Sergeant Ethan Ward and his extraordinary canine partner, Cale. Their actions during last week's tornado not only saved a young boy's life, but reminded us all of the unwavering strength of our first responders." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed like lightning, bursts of white against the dim room. Ethan squinted slightly, blinking against the onslaught. Kyle didn't flinch. 2 honor guards stepped forward, carrying a small velvet box. Inside gleamed the medal, gold-plated, 6-pointed, heavy with ceremony. The governor pinned it to Ethan's chest, the clasp biting into his uniform. Reporters leaned closer, snapping photos from every angle. The mayor clasped Ethan's hand, raising it for the cameras. Cale barked once, sharp, which drew laughter from the audience. Someone shouted, "Hero dog!" and the crowd responded with cheers. But beneath the applause, Ethan felt only hollow space. The metal on his chest didn't weigh like honor. It weighed like guilt. Because he knew the truth. The boy hadn't been saved by the man in the uniform. He had been saved by the dog at his feet, the one who had sniffed through chaos, who had clawed through rubble, who had refused to leave until a fragile heartbeat was found. Kyle didn't wear medals. He didn't need speeches. Yet he deserved them more than anyone in that room. Ethan glanced down at him, at the way Kyle sat steady and calm, tongue lolling slightly, as though this were just another long shift. He thought of how many times those instincts had cut through darkness. Sophia in the washer, Tyler in the storage bin, the boy under the collapsed trailer. Each time, Kyle had known when no one else did. Each time, Kyle had carried the weight Ethan couldn't. The applause swelled again, but Ethan's mind drifted to quieter moments. The notes pinned to his corkboard, the children's drawings, the pink marker scrawl from Sophia's thank you. Those were the only awards that mattered. When the ceremony ended, the press swarmed. Questions shouted from every angle. What went through your mind in the storm? How did Kyle know where to search? What's next for you and your partner? Ethan answered with practiced brevity, his voice steady but distant. We do our job. That's all. Meanwhile, Kyle became the star. Children rushed forward to pet him, their laughter cutting through the noise. He sat patiently, soaking in their touch, his calmness softening even the hardest faces in the crowd. Parents snapped photos, officers knelt to scratch his ears. For them, Kyle was not just a working dog. He was hope with 4 legs and fur. And Ethan let it happen. Because if anyone deserved the spotlight, it was Kyle. But as he slipped out a side door later, medal still pinned to his chest, the applause ringing faint in the background, he couldn't escape the hollow ache. Hero was a word too heavy for him. It belonged to Kyle. It belonged to the children who had survived. Not to a man still haunted by the ghost of a little girl named Lily. Ethan walked into the cool night air, unfastened the medal, and slipped it into his pocket, where the cameras couldn't see. Kale walked at his side, tail low but steady, as if sensing the storm inside his handler was louder than the one outside. Together, they disappeared into the quiet, the noise of ceremony fading behind them. And Ethan thought, not for the first time, medals tarnish, headlines fade, but Kyle's bark, Kale's unyielding truth, was the only honor that mattered. The reception hall glittered with chandeliers and polished speeches. Crystal glasses clinked, Trays of hors d'oeuvres passed on silver platters, and everywhere Ethan turned, someone was smiling too wide. The Medal of Valor ceremony had spilled into celebration, but the air here felt different, calculated, curated, each handshake measured like currency. Ethan stood near the back wall, sipping club soda, trying to disappear into the wallpaper. Kael lay at his side, calm as ever, his head resting on his paws, amber eyes half closed, but scanning the room in that quiet way he always did. For a few minutes, Ethan allowed himself to be still, the noise of politics washing over him. Then, through the crowd, he saw them. Senator Carlton Bellamy and his daughter Vanessa. Time hadn't dulled their edges. Bellamy still carried himself like a campaign poster come to life. Sharp suit, perfect tie, smile honed for cameras. Vanessa matched him stride for stride, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Her dress immaculate. Her hair styled into the kind of poise that looked effortless, but had taken an army of mirrors. Ethan's gut tightened. He hadn't seen them in years, but he remembered every detail. Vanessa, the prosecutor who had once argued Ethan's suspension was necessary, that a grieving officer who'd spiraled after his daughter's death was unfit to carry a badge. Bellamy, the senator who had pushed to make Ethan's downfall a campaign talking point, parading his failures as proof of reform. They hadn't just tried to end his career. They had wanted to erase him, and now here they were, gliding across the room as if drawn to him. "Sergeant Ward," Bellamy said warmly, extending his hand like an old friend. What a story. What a night. Ethan didn't take it immediately. He let the silence hang just long enough for Bellamy's smile to stiffen, then clasped his hand with a grip more firm than friendly. "Senator?" Vanessa stepped in, her smile all sugar. "We were so moved by your speech tonight. The humility, the honesty. It resonated, truly. You're exactly the kind of figure our communities need." Ethan raised a brow. "Funny. That's not what you said 12 years ago." Her smile faltered for the briefest second, but she recovered quickly. "That was a different time, different circumstances." Bellamy chuckled, the sound rehearsed. "We've all grown since then, haven't we? What matters now is the future." "And you, Sergeant, are the future." Kael lifted his head, ears twitching, his eyes locking onto Bellamy like he could sense the shift beneath the polished words. Ethan folded his arms. "Cut to it. What do you want?" Vanessa exchanged a quick glance with her father, then leaned closer. "We are launching a statewide initiative to expand K-9 programs in rural communities. With your story, your redemption, Kael's heroics, we could change the conversation. Build support. Secure funding." Bellamy nodded, lowering his voice like he was letting Ethan in on a secret. "You've become a symbol, Sergeant. People see courage, second chances, resilience. That's powerful. With your voice on our side, we could bring real change." Ethan's jaw tightened. The medal on his chest suddenly felt heavier, not with pride, but with disgust. "You want me to be your poster boy?" he said flatly. "Not at all," Vanessa replied quickly, her tone soft, persuasive. "We want to amplify what you already are. A hero. A man who overcame his past to save lives. It's inspiring." Ethan glanced down at Kael, who had risen silently, his body pressed against Ethan's leg, his gaze unblinking on the Bellamys. The dog didn't growl, didn't move, but the tension in him spoke volumes. Ethan exhaled slowly, then looked back at them. "You didn't care about redemption when you were stripping me down in court. You didn't see a man worth saving, you saw a headline. And now you see the same thing. Only difference is, This time, the headline works for you. Bellamy's smile wavered, his politician mask slipping for just a second. Vanessa's lips tightened, her eyes hardening despite the sweet curve of her mouth. "You're making a mistake," Bellamy said, his voice colder now. "This is bigger than you." Ethan shook his head. "You're right. It is bigger than me. It's about kids who survived because a dog wouldn't quit. It's about the families who wrote me letters, who sent drawings, who thanked Kyle for being the reason their children came home. That's bigger than any speech you'll ever give." The senator's jaw ticked, his smile frozen in place like a mask cracking. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, the sweetness gone. Kyle gave a single, sharp bark, the sound slicing through the murmur of the room. Heads turned, conversations paused. Ethan rested a hand on Kyle's back, steady but firm. "If you want to build something real, start by telling the truth. Start by putting Kyle's name before mine. Otherwise, you're just using us. And I've been used enough." He stepped back, his voice quiet but final. "Find another symbol." The Bellamys stared at him, their polished edges dulled by the blunt force of his refusal. For the first time that evening, they had no words. Ethan turned, Kyle following at his side, the dog's presence like a wall between him and the people who had once tried to bury him. The applause from earlier still echoed faintly in the hall, but here, in this moment, there was only silence, and the truth that he would not let them shape his story again. The press conference was held in the same city hall where the Medal of Valor had been awarded. The marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and rows of chairs filled the chamber, every seat occupied by reporters, cameras, and city officials. A podium stood at the front, flanked by flags and microphones, the kind of stage built not for truth, but for spectacle. Ethan had never liked rooms like this. Too polished, too loud, too far removed from the places where real lives hung by threads. But tonight, he wasn't here to play along. Cale walked at his side as he entered, drawing the attention of nearly every camera in the room. The shepherd's coat gleamed under the lights, his steady gait commanding a presence that even the most polished politician couldn't match. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and shutters clicked like distant thunder. The mayor leaned toward him as he approached the podium, a hand on his arm, a smile stretched too wide. "Keep it simple. Shake hands. Thank the right people. That's all." Ethan met his eyes, then glanced at Kyle. "That's not all." He stepped to the podium. The room quieted, anticipation thick in the air. "Good evening," Ethan began, his voice steady but low, carrying the weight of someone who wasn't here to perform. "I've been asked to speak about heroism, about what it means, and about why I'm standing here tonight with this medal on my chest." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Politicians, reporters, strangers, waiting to carve his story into something neat, something consumable. He wouldn't give them that. "I need to start with honesty," he continued, "because too many of you know the polished version already. The photo, the headline, the soundbite. What you don't know is that I am not a perfect man. I have failed. I have fallen harder than most people here will ever admit to." The room shifted, uncomfortable. 12 years ago, Ethan said, his throat tightening. "My daughter, Lily, died in an accident, a washing machine. I wasn't there in time, and I never forgave myself for that. I spiraled into drinking, into bad choices, into losing the people I loved most. There were nights when I didn't care if I ever came back. Cameras flashed, pens scratched. He pressed on anyway. But I did come back, not because I suddenly became strong, not because I earned it, but because someone gave me a second chance. A captain who believed in broken men, a unit that believed in dogs, and one dog in particular, Kyle. At the sound of his name, Kyle lifted his head proudly, his amber eyes sweeping the crowd as if he understood the moment. Ethan's voice softened. You've heard about the children saved this past year. Sophia in the washer, Tyler in the storage bin, the boy under the collapsed trailer. You've heard the word miracle thrown around. But the truth is simpler. It wasn't me. It was him. He gestured toward Kyle, who sat steady at his side, tail curled around his paws. I followed where he led. I listened when no one else did. I trusted when others doubted. And because of that, children went home who might not have. If you want to call that heroism, fine. But the hero is sitting on 4 legs, not 2. The silence in the room grew thick, heavy. Reporters glanced at each other, unsure how to package what they were hearing. Ethan leaned forward, his voice firmer now. Heroism isn't medals. It isn't cameras or speeches. It isn't being perfect. Heroism is showing up when no one else will. It's standing in the rubble of a storm with nothing but your hands and refusing to stop digging. It's trusting a dog's bark over the easy explanation. It's being there, not because it's easy, but because someone has to. He let the words settle, his gaze sweeping the room. I don't want to be your poster boy. I don't want my past scrubbed clean so you can sell a campaign or headline. I want the truth told, that a man with flaws can still fight for what's right, and that sometimes the truest heroes don't wear uniforms or medals. Sometimes they just wear fur and carry the weight of second chances. Kyle shifted closer, leaning lightly against his leg. Ethan rested a hand on the shepherd's back, steadying himself. If you remember anything from tonight, he said quietly, don't remember me. Remember Kyle. Remember the kids who are alive because of him. And remember that courage doesn't look like perfection. It looks like showing up when the world is falling apart. He stepped back from the podium before anyone could clap, before the mayor could smooth it into a soundbite, before the Bellamys, seated near the front, their smiles tight, could twist it into something useful. The room buzzed with stunned silence. Some reporters scribbled furiously, others just stared. And as Ethan walked out with Kyle at his side, the dog's nails clicking against the marble, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness. Not because the burden was gone, but because he had finally spoken without chains. Outside, the night air was cool, the city humming quietly beyond the steps of City Hall. Ethan knelt, scratching Kyle behind the ears. We told it our way, he whispered. Kyle's tail thumped once against the stone, steady and sure. And for the first time, Ethan believed it was enough. The Internal Affairs office was colder than the rest of the precinct. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. The blinds were always drawn halfway, the fluorescent lights too harsh, the walls lined with framed regulations no one actually read. It was the kind of room built to make you feel small before you ever sat down. Ethan sat anyway, shoulders squared, Kale at his feet. The shepherd lay stretched out on the tile floor, calm but watchful, his amber eyes flicking to every sound. The hum of the copier down the hall, the distant clang of a locker closing, the soft shuffle of footsteps drawing closer. Across the desk sat Captain Monroe, head of Internal Affairs. His tie was too tight, his posture too precise. His hands folded over a manila folder, like it was both shield and weapon. Sergeant Ward, Monroe began, his voice measured. We've received an anonymous report. It concerns you. Ethan didn't flinch. He'd been expecting this. Ever since the Bellamys resurfaced, ever since he'd refused to play their game, he knew they wouldn't let him walk away clean. Monroe slid the folder across the desk. Ethan didn't open it. He didn't need to. Field sobriety test, Monroe said. Dated 2013. An incident that was never formally documented. The report suggests you failed. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. He could still remember that night, blurry around the edges, but sharp where it mattered. The grief, the bottle, the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. He'd passed the test by sheer force of will, but the shame of standing on the side of the road, balancing on one foot while his life collapsed around him, had never left him. Now, 12 years later, it was back. I passed that test, Ethan said quietly. The officer knew it. The report was filed, then buried because there was nothing there. I was broken, but I wasn't drunk behind the wheel. Not that night. Monroe studied him, expression unreadable. Anonymous complaints are tricky. Sometimes they're ghosts, sometimes they're knives. Either way, we're obligated to investigate. Kyle shifted beside Ethan, letting out a low rumble that vibrated against the tile. Ethan laid a hand on the shepherd's back, grounding himself. "Let me guess," Ethan said. "The report came in right after the press conference." Monroe didn't confirm, didn't deny. His silence was answer enough. Ethan leaned forward now, his eyes hard. "This isn't about sobriety tests. This is about silencing me. I embarrassed people with power, and they want to remind me I don't get to escape my past." Monroe's gaze didn't waver. "The past has a way of resurfacing when we least want it to. You know that better than most." Ethan swallowed, the words cutting deeper than intended. He thought of Lily, of her tiny body in the washer, of every failure that had led him to this path. His past had always been a ghost sitting at his table, but tonight, it wasn't a ghost. It was a weapon in someone else's hands. Still, he didn't shrink from it. "I'm not who I was," Ethan said, his voice steady now, steel beneath it. "I made mistakes, big ones. I lost everything because of them. But I fought my way back. You've seen the kids alive today because I didn't quit. Because KL didn't quit. If someone wants to smear me, fine. But they can't take away the truth of what we've done." Monroe regarded him for a long moment, then closed the folder without opening it again. "You'll cooperate with the investigation, of course?" "Of course." Monroe nodded. "Then we'll see where it lands." The conversation was over, at least officially. Ethan stood, Kale rising smoothly at his side. For a moment, he looked down at the folder still sitting on the desk, thin, fragile, yet heavy enough to topple careers. He met Monroe's eyes one last time. "The difference between then and now, back then, I was trying to hide. Now I don't care who knows. The truth doesn't scare me anymore." He turned and walked out, Kyle's nails clicking on the tile, the shepherd's presence steady against the weight of the storm gathering behind him. Outside the IA office, the precinct buzzed with the usual rhythm, phones ringing, voices carrying, radios chattering. To them, Ethan was still the man who had walked through storms, crawled through rubble, pulled children out alive. But in the shadows, the Bellamys were writing a different story, one meant to erase the truth. Ethan clenched his jaw, his hand brushing Kale's head as they walked toward the exit. "They want me to break again," he murmured. "They don't understand. I already broke. What's left is what doesn't bend." Kyle looked up at him, amber eyes calm, as though to say, "Then let them try." And as the heavy door swung shut behind them, Ethan carried with him not the weight of the accusation, but the resolve that this time, his past would not own him. Ethan's office wasn't much to look at. The paint was dull, the desk scarred from years of elbows and paperwork. The chair creaked when he leaned back. A single lamp burned in the corner, casting shadows across file stacks that never seemed to shrink. But there was one thing that set the room apart. One thing that drew every set of eyes that stepped through the doorway. The wall. Pinned across the corkboard and taped onto the plaster itself were letters, drawings, and mementos collected over the past year. None of them came from superiors or politicians. They came from children, survivors, families who had nearly lost everything but didn't. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, Kyle at his side, and let his eyes travel across the patchwork of paper. He had just come from internal affairs, the weight of anonymous accusations still clinging to him like smoke. But here, in this quiet room, the noise of politics faded. Here was the truth. At the top left corner hung Sophia's bunny note, written in pink marker on lined notebook paper, the handwriting crooked and uneven. "Tell your dog, thank you for finding me. My bunny says thank you too." Taped beside it was a Polaroid Melissa Carter had sent later, Sophia clutching the stuffed rabbit in one hand, while Kyle's paw rested gently in the other. Sophia's smile stretched ear to ear. Next to it, Tyler's thank you card. Construction paper folded in half, covered in glitter glue that had long since shed onto Ethan's desk. The front read, in bold block letters, "To Kale, the superdog." Inside, a drawing of a blue storage bin, with Kale standing proudly on top, tongue lolling, tail wagging. Ethan's chest tightened every time he looked at it. Further down, the Storm Boy's crayon cape drawing. A crude sketch of a collapsed trailer. Kale drawn as larger than life, wearing a red cape, barking at the storm. Across the top, the boy had scrawled in shaky letters, "Thank you for saving me. You're braver than Batman." Ethan touched the corner of that one now, his finger tracing the wobbly red lines of the cape. Behind him, Kyle shifted, tail thumping once against the floor. Ethan looked down at him. "He drew you bigger than the house," he said softly. "Guess he got it right." Kale blinked up at him, amber eyes steady, then lowered his head onto his paws as if to say, "Big or small? I just did my job." Ethan exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease from his shoulders. His gaze drifted to the other letters. A folded sheet of notebook paper from a foster mother who had written, "I don't know how to explain to Tyler that monsters don't always win, but your dog has given him something to believe in." A postcard from a retired firefighter in Ohio who had simply written, "Keep digging. We see you." A child's doodle of Kale wearing a badge, his tail wagging so hard it lifted him off the ground. Ethan sank into his chair, the Medal of Valor heavy in his pocket, and realized none of that mattered here. Not the medal, not the speeches, not the whispers of old sins weaponized by politicians. This wall, this messy, imperfect collage, was his true record. Every crooked letter, every misspelled word, every clumsy drawing carried more weight than any official commendation ever could. Because they weren't written for cameras or campaigns. They were written in gratitude, in survival, in love. He leaned back, staring at the wall until the lines blurred and memories flooded in. Sophia's small hand clutching Kyle's fur as they pulled her from the washer. Tyler's muffled sobs as duct tape was cut from his mouth. The boy under the rubble, dirt-streaked but alive. Kyle pressing close until his cries softened into breathing. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face, his throat tightening. "This is it," he murmured. "This is the only ledger that counts." Kyle lifted his head again, watching him silently. Ethan smiled faintly, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "They can dig up old reports. They can smear my name, but they can't erase this." He gestured toward the wall. They can't erase you. Kyle leaned into his touch, warm and steady. For a long moment, the office was quiet, save for the hum of the lamp and the distant echo of footsteps in the hall. Ethan let the silence wrap around him, the wall before him not just paper and ink, but a testament to every time he and Cale had shown up when it mattered. It wasn't perfect. Neither of them were. But perfection wasn't the point. Presence was, persistence was, and these letters, these scribbles of hope, were proof enough. Ethan sat forward, pulling the medal from his pocket. He held it in his palm, its polished surface catching the lamplight, gleaming like it wanted to prove something. Then he set it on the desk, face down, and let it stay there. On the wall, a crooked crayon sketch of Kyle barked silently at a storm. That was the record that mattered. Ethan leaned back again, Cale settling at his feet, and for the first time since the anonymous report, the knot in his chest loosened. Let the world throw shadows. Here was the light. The sun was dipping low when Ethan parked the cruiser by the old footpath that curved down toward the river. The day had been long. Paperwork, questions, whispers from internal affairs echoing like ghosts. But he hadn't brought Kyle here for duty. Tonight was for something else. Something quieter. The air smelled of water and earth, the kind of scent that carried memory. Fireflies had begun to spark across the fading light, drifting like lanterns above the tall grass. The river itself moved slow, its surface painted with streaks of lavender and gold, reflecting a sky that couldn't quite decide between day and night. Kyle padded at Ethan's side, his gait steady, his ears flicking at the sounds of summer. Crickets beginning their chorus, the splash of a fish breaking the surface, the faint laughter of children playing further down the bank. Ethan walked with his hands in his pockets, boots crunching softly on gravel, his eyes drawn to the water. He had walked this path years ago, back when Lily was still alive, back when life felt simpler, before grief had hollowed him out. He remembered holding her hand, her little legs working to keep up, her laughter ringing brighter than the river itself. Now, the memory was a shadow, but tonight it didn't crush him the way it used to. And tonight, it walked beside him, softened by the presence of the dog at his side. They reached the edge of the bank, where the grass gave way to smooth stones. Ethan sat, lowering himself with a sigh, the kind that came from deep inside. Kyle settled beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. For a while, neither moved. Across the river, the children's laughter carried in bursts. High, bright, unbroken. A boy skipped rocks, each one bouncing once, twice, before sinking. A girl chased fireflies with a jar, her feet pattering lightly against the earth. Their joy filled the dusk with something fragile, but alive. Ethan watched them, his chest tight, but not with pain, with something gentler. Hope, maybe, or peace, trying to find its way back in. He reached down, resting a hand on Cale's thick fur. The shepherd leaned into the touch without hesitation, his body warm, solid, a presence that asked for nothing, but gave everything. Ethan's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "You saved me as much as them." The words slipped out like a confession, raw and simple, because it was true. Every time Kale had barked when no one else believed, every time he had dug through rubble, every time he had pressed his weight against Ethan's leg when the past threatened to pull him under, he hadn't just saved children. He had saved the man beside him. Cale shifted, pressing closer, his head brushing Ethan's shoulder. The movement wasn't grand, wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. Because sometimes, Ethan whispered, eyes on the fireflies sparking across the river, heroes wear fur, and sometimes they carry the weight of second chances. The words hung in the air, caught between the fading light and the river's steady current. Kale exhaled, a slow sigh, and settled more firmly against Ethan, his body warm in the cooling night. They sat like that for a long time, man and dog, listening to the water lap against the stones, watching the sky darken to indigo. The laughter of children faded into the distance as families called them home, but the echo lingered like a promise. Ethan felt it then, not absolution, not the erasure of his past, but something sturdier, a truth he could carry forward. He wasn't perfect. He never would be. But with Kyle at his side, he had become something better. Present, reliable, willing to show up when no one else would. And maybe that was enough. The fireflies drifted closer, their light soft against the gathering night. Ethan leaned back on his hands, breathing in the cool air, letting the sound of the river fill the quiet spaces inside him. Kyle stayed pressed to his side, the weight of him grounding, reassuring. When Ethan finally rose, brushing dirt from his palms, Kyle rose too, stretching before falling into step beside him. They walked back along the path, their shadows long and dark against the last traces of twilight. The world would keep throwing storms, Ethan knew. There would always be ghosts, always be battles waiting. But there would also be this: fireflies, rivers, children's laughter, and the steady presence of a dog who never asked for medals, only the chance to be there. And as they reached the cruiser, Ethan glanced once more at the river, the fireflies glowing like stars scattered across the grass. He smiled faintly, quietly. "Come on, partner," he said, opening the door. "We've still got work to do." Kyle leapt inside, turning once before settling, his eyes already scanning the night. Ethan slid into the driver's seat, the engine rumbling to life. Together, they pulled away from the riverbank, the glow of fireflies fading behind them, carrying with them not the weight of past failures, but the quiet strength of second chances. Sometimes the truest heroes don't wear uniforms or medals. They simply walk beside us on four legs, carrying more love and loyalty than we can ever repay. Stories like Ethan and Kale's remind us that the bond between a person and a German shepherd, or any dog, is more than companionship. It's a lifeline, a source of comfort, and proof that we're never truly alone. These animals give us their best without question, and in doing so, they bring out the best in us. If hearing this touched you, you might enjoy exploring a resource that helps deepen that connection with your own dog. I've found it meaningful myself, and you may too, but only if it feels right for you. At the end of the day, what matters most is cherishing the moments we're given. A wagging tail at the door, a head resting on your knee, or the quiet company on a long walk. Sometimes, that's all the reminder we need, that love can be simple, loyal, and strong enough to carry us through anything. Take care of your dog, and let them take care of you too.